Hi, I'm Clara, and this is the Practice with Clara podcast, where we go into philosophy and all things yoga related, which has been my passion for the last 20 years. In today's episode, we go into the root chakra. We break down what is sciatica, how to alleviate pain from it, and what to avoid when you're feeling any lower back pain. We also go into mythology, the story of Shiva and Parvati, and lastly, we go into rituals that will help center you. If you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Practice with Clara podcast. You're sitting with Stephanie.
And Clara.
For today's discussion on the root chakra, Muladhara. So I thought I'd read a quote from Wheels of Life by Anodea Judith. This is a great book, recommended by Clara.
Yes.
Your body is the journey, and it is where you begin. It is your connection to the physical world, your foundation, the home of your dance. You are the place from which all action and understanding will arise, and to which it will return. You are the testing ground of truth.
Beautiful. Why did you choose that?
I chose this because I feel it summarizes so elegantly in such a short paragraph our connection to our body and what it does for us, the dance, truth, in the coming back into ourselves. There's a truth that's revealed when we sit with how we feel and we explore how we feel and we kind of move in the sensation. It's beautiful what erupts, and it's a journey, and the returning to and the rising up. Yeah, it's all the words.
So today's theme, or this week's theme, is the root chakra. So that's why Steph is picking, I'm assuming, from the root chakra with her. Yeah. And so this idea of coming back to ourselves, and so root chakra generally deals with your roots, literally. It's the lowest point, so it's connected to the earth element, and it's the place in terms of psychology where we think of it's the survival mode. It's the usually the affirmation is I belong, and so coming back to ourselves is a sense of belonging to ourselves, or a sense of coming home.
And it's very primal with themes around like family, tribal, I would say. You mentioned survival. And so the opposite of those, the negation of this would be fear, where you don't belong. You don't have a foundation of support. So foundation being food, shelter, again, community, family.
Yeah, love.
Love, exactly.
And so we talk a lot about the chakras as yoga teachers and yoga practitioners and people who study any Eastern thought. Actually, I feel like chakras is a really big one. And so when we connect to our root chakra or work with the root chakra, we work with all the themes that Steph and I just talked about. And so in terms of the yoga practice itself, we deal a lot with the legs and connecting to the legs and feeling the connection to the earth itself. And so if you wanted to have a more earth-bound practice, you would stay low to the ground. You would do things that are very leg heavy, not a lot of arm variations, things holding poses for longer. Those would all be things that you would add to a first chakra class.
And maybe let's go into a little bit why Earth chakra is a relevant chakra to honor in this time of year, being summer, lots of solar energy moving upwards. Too much of that might cause overexcitement, hyperstimulation, anxiety. And we discussed this in a previous podcast where you want to balance with the opposite. And Claire's quote is, like attracts like, opposite heals.
Yeah, it's not my quote, it's Ayurveda, but
Yeah.
It's the one that I like to say a lot, yeah, for sure. And so, this time of year, depending upon what hemisphere you live in, but here, those of us in the northern hemisphere, right, this is the time that we're outside, we're doing a lot more activity, though this time, right now, it's all very interesting, but at least in Vancouver, people are, at least this weekend or yesterday, they were outside. There was a lot of activity happening. Yeah. And so this is usually a time of year that a lot of people actually get physically burnt out because they're doing all of their fun physical activities that they do outside. And so how we usually show up to the mat as yoga teachers as well as practitioners is that we want to create usually a slower moving, a darker, heavier class to kind of counter all the excitement that we're having outside.
So Clara, talk a little bit about the class that's released this week. I think it's literally called Stay Low. So talk about some of the elements in this class and the body parts you would open. You're mentioning legs, staying close to the ground. So for yoga teachers, what kind of things would you include in a class to honor this type of a theme?
So it depends on, great question. It depends on what we could go one of two ways with, or I go one of two ways, I should say, with earth classes. The first way that I would do it, like I just said, a lot of standing leg poses. So warrior, we would do a lot of the warrior poses, maybe standing leg balances. So we do strengthening as well as doing a lot of hip openers. So leg strengthening would be the one standing on one leg or holding poses for an extended period of time, like warrior two, triangle pose, side angle pose, things like that. And then the floor series would be a lot longer. So the floor series, so in the last part of the class, I talked about this actually in our last podcast. In the lunar part of class, it would be a lot of a longer series than the solar part, just to kind of, again, have this earth element, this feeling of staying low to the ground. A lot of forward folds would be another one that we would have in here because it creates this more of this introspection. One of the descriptions of earth is generally dark and heavy, so those would be two things that we would bring into this class, and that I did bring into this class at the Stay Low. And the idea of that is just to balance all the heat that's probably being exerted right now in your life.
And let's take it into so something that's in the Wheels of Life. She talks about the sciatic nerve, so the nerves running from the soles of the feet up into the hip, being the root of the body that connects us to the ground. And sciatic issues show up a lot in yoga. It's a pretty common issue where the nerve is pinched. So I thought, Clara, if you could shed some light for teachers and for students, if you're dealing with this issue, on how it occurs, poses that would relieve the pain, the pinching in the low back, and then poses not to do, to stay away from.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So your sciatic nerve goes through the sacrum itself, and then goes through your glutes, goes through your bum muscles. And so actually a lot of people who think they have sciatica actually have piriformitis. So the piriformis is another very small muscle that is in, like, just behind your glute max, behind your big butt muscle, kind of in the center there is your piriformis, and then the SI or the sciatic nerve goes through that as well. So sometimes what we think is happening in terms of sciatica is actually like your piriformis is too tight. So we call it SI instability, sacral iliac instability. So again, your sciatic nerve goes through sacral iliac, so it goes through the sacrum and the ilium. It goes through that area, and so we get a lot of SI instability in Vinyasa yoga specifically because we do a lot of asymmetrical poses. And so a great one, or a not so great one, that tends to kind of flare up SI instability is three-legged downward dog. And if you're not engaging your core and keeping your pelvis neutral when you're lifting your leg up, right, and just especially if you're very, very mobile in your back, just reaching the leg up really, really high and opening up the hip to one side, right, is going to start to flare up that SI on that side specifically. So we recommend that if you're dealing with any kind of flare up, so how do I know that this is what's happening? Generally, it's pain in the lower back, and then it's what we call referral pain that's going from your butt, essentially what feels just above your butt, and then it goes down the back of your leg, through the knee, all the way down into the calf and foot. And so at least what I've been told by healthcare practitioners is that if you only feel the pain up to your knee, then that's usually your piriformis that's acting up. But if you feel it going past your knee in terms of that referral pain, like zzz, it feels like a zzz kind of going down, goes past the knee, then that's definitely sciatica. Now, that being said, I am not a healthcare practitioner, so definitely go talk to your RMT, your physical therapist, your acupuncturist, whoever it is, and make sure that you get it diagnosed by a medical professional versus me. But these are just things that we think about and understand as yoga teachers. And so you would definitely ask your student, where are you feeling the pain? Like, where is the referral pain? Is it going all the way down or what? So those of us who are dealing, I have a lot of SI instability, so I'm going to speak for myself. When my SI is flared up, so I'm feeling this this pain, this dull pain on one side of my sacrum, right? That triangular bone attached to the pelvis below your lumbar, below the low back. If I'm feeling that pain there, and again, it's going down one leg or it's just in my butt, I don't do three-legged downward dog. I just step the foot forward, and you want to make sure that when you're doing what we call hip extension, meaning one leg is behind you. So an example of that would be a lunge pose would be another time that your leg would be behind you, your leg would be, or your leg is in what we call hip extension, which means the leg is behind the bum. When I do lunges, then I always bend the back knee quite a bit to keep the lower back long. Or if I'm really feeling it, I just put the back knee down on the ground and then stay more upright with the torso. So then that way my lumbar spine, my lower back, ideally is upright versus on an angle, okay? So the biggest thing you want to be checking is how to keep my lower back long versus compressed, okay? And the biggest way that we compress the lower back is when we take the legs behind the pelvis. So those would be two things to be mindful of. And if you're feeling it, specifically more pain in the low back, then all forward folds would have bent knees, okay? And then when you're coming from a standing forward fold, when you're coming all the way up to stand, keep your knees bent, right? And really root your heels down to engage your legs. So the other thing that needs to happen, generally people who have chronic SI instability, meaning it happens often, it's not once in a while, but often, generally means that your glutes, your butt muscles are not firing properly. So you would want to do a lot of butt strengthening, which is something that I'm really big on. If we've been in class together before, or if you take my class online, I do a lot of glute strengthening, and that specifically because of my own past with SI stuff. Did I get through everything? Okay, yes. And then now what do I do for it? How do we alleviate it? So the biggest way to alleviate it is generally you want to stretch your glute muscles. You want to stretch them and then you want to strengthen them. So it's a little bit of both. So if you're knee deep in that feeling, meaning the flare up happened that day, then you definitely want to be doing some stretching to kind of open it up and soften it, because usually when a muscle is aggravated, it contracts, right? It's a natural way of protecting itself. So any stretches that stretch your glute med, your glute max, so and your glute min. So ideally, your glute med and your glute min are on the side of your butt, and your glute max is that big butt muscle behind you. So ways of doing that would be thread the needle, pigeon pose, double pigeon, cow face. So any of those hip openers, as long as they're okay on your knees, would be great for that. Also, you want to stretch out your hamstrings. So Hanuman or Ardha Hanuman, definitely Ardha Hanuman, not Hanuman, just kidding. So half split pose, we also call that a variation of a runner's stretch, where the one leg is straight out in front of you and you're bowing over the leg with the other knee bent. You come into it from lunge. So those would be ways of relieving it. And then a psoas release. So a great example of that would be the most mild version would be to lie down on your back and then bend one knee into the chest and straighten the other leg on the ground out in front of you and hug it in that way. And if your psoas is your hip flexor muscle, and it'll just, if you open that, it generally opens up what's happening behind you. And if it felt okay, you could put a block or a bolster or something, ideally lower to the ground so you're not super high, underneath your butt, and then one knee into the chest, known as wind release pose, one leg straight out, and then that would also release the psoas. So you essentially want to kind of release all the muscles around your sacrum, that triangular bone, and then once it hopefully is no longer flared up, then you want to strengthen it. So you want to do all kinds of butt exercises. So a great one would be glute bridge, which would be lifting the butt off the ground and coming down halfway or all 3/4 of the way and then going back up. So doing that a couple times. If you've ever used the TheraBand, you put it around your knees, and essentially you do squats with that and then take the knees out to the sides and do little wiggles out like this. This will activate glute min and glute med. And so, yes, you want to stretch it, but you also want to strengthen the muscles around the SI, because that'll really help so that you don't continue to have that SI problem. That was really long. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Okay, and I want to add to that and ask, what about back bends? Would you do, because back bends compress the sacrum, so would you advise people to do back bends if they have SI issues? If not, what are they doing instead?
Okay, so ideally, you're not compressing your sacrum. You're not compressing your lumbar spine in back bends.
No, but that's what tends to happen
Yes.
when people blast into it and aren't aware of how to integrate and hug in.
Yeah. So the problem that's happening, so if you go into a back bend and you start to really feel compression in your sacrum area, it means you're engaging your ass too much. We want the butt to be engaged. We just don't want it to be doing everything. So if you lift up, and I always tell people, like in bridge pose, stick your finger in your, not in your butt, but like on your butt, stick it, right? And if it feels super rock hard, it's too intense, right? We usually say you want to be engaging about 60% of your glute capacity, not 160%. So if you're starting to feel compression, too much. So what we recommend in terms of back bends when you're feeling this SI stuff is take it down a notch. So bridge pose with a block underneath the sacrum, or interlace fingers. But then again, like putting the fingers, getting the fingers to tap your bum to kind of observe, can I soften the glutes a little bit more? Lift pubic bone gently towards belly button just to lengthen the lower back. And again, it's a gentle drawing in and up, and then engaging the core, hugging the belly in and up. A great one to do instead would actually be to lie down on your belly and take what we call locust pose or Shalambhasana. And I would recommend Ardha Shalambhasana. So feet would stay on the ground, and you just lift the torso and the hands up off the ground, and do it very small, so that ideally most of your belly actually stays on the ground. You're just lifting your sternum, your head, and your shoulders and your hands off the ground. And then again, you can kind of bring your fingers to your butt and observe, am I doing this all with my butt? If so, relax a little bit, engage the core by hugging the belly in and up, and then reach the sternum, the breastbone forward and up, so that hopefully you start to feel your mid-back muscles engaging. And it's really great to strengthen, again, the muscles above the lower back, as well as the ones below it. That's all going to give you really good, healthy lower back love.
And I think back bends from the belly are probably best because you're not using your hands to wrench yourself into it when you lift your hands up, as opposed to wheel or bridge when you can use your arms. If you really want to build the abdominal strength, the back strength, anything from the belly is going to give you that, as long as you lift your hands up and don't crank into it. Yeah,
because you're also working against gravity, so you generally can't go as high, which is great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about Anna Forrest and Forrest Yoga, because something, as you've been talking, you're reminding me of using the blanket, the rolled up blanket, or the mat, or the block to hug in and integrate. Yeah, and a lot of her work is deep core to support the low back and bring the lengthening of the low back, which is something you bring into a lot of your classes.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite thing that I learned from Anna Forrest. It's just the work that she does. I love her therapeutics work, specifically around the lower back and activating and stretching the psoas, which I think is two things that we don't, again, pay attention to too much, or at least in the yoga classes I've been to. So one of the things that she gets people to do is she gets people to, she calls it the snail or the roll, and you roll up a mat or a blanket. And so you use it in two ways. The first way that if we've been together before, if you've been with Anna before, I usually use a block, but if you've been with Anna, she puts it in between her thighs, and that's how you do core work, is hugging that block, bolster, or blanket in, right? And then lifting up, doing very small movements to engage what we call your transverse abdominis. So if you are a member on the site and you've done the core work class, most of that is Anna Forrest work. And if you notice, it's like very, very subtle work, meaning that your legs are not doing too much wild and crazy stuff. It's really about your deep core muscles activating what we call the stabilizers. And so if you ever want your stabilizers to work harder versus what we call your movers and shakers, then you need to do smaller movements in order to activate those guys, right? When we do ballistic movement, meaning fast movement, that your bigger muscles will be activated. When you do small movements, your smaller muscles will be activated.
And it's way harder.
Yeah, it is, because generally the stabilizers are not as strong as your movers and shakers. There's another technical term for that, but I use movers and shakers. So the other thing that I love that she does is with that same roll, you actually go onto hands and knees and you put it on your belly and you lie down on it on your belly. And the idea of that is to relax kind of all the tension that we hold in our abdomen. And then if you are able to relax enough, you'll actually get into your psoas. You'll get into the muscle, your deep hip flexor muscle that's behind your organs, because it starts back there. And so if you're able to soften, you'll actually start to relieve those, which is going to give your lower back a whole lot more space.
That's the roll above the belly button, below the ribs.
Yeah. Not above the belly button. It's you put apex is your belly button, and then essentially the roll kind of goes just in the fleshy part of your abdomen. Ideally, no bones. If you do want to try that, the one thing I will say is if you have any kind of digestive issues, this is not the pose for you. But as long as you're not dealing with any abdominal stuff, then this would be a great pose to do.
That pose is really one of surrender because you have to soften to receive the obstacle and breathe into it. And it is intense, but it's so good.
Yeah.
If you can just be with it and settle.
Yeah, relax into it. Exactly.
Yeah, goes with our theme. So let's talk more a little bit about the body in terms of providing signals that give you the space to heal. So we're talking about the sciatic nerve, all these things that are giving you more access to understand what it is you need to do to orient yourself.
Can you give me another example?
So I'm thinking specifically in terms of how our bodies, through the emotion and literal physical triggers, are giving us an entry point into examine something deeper that's going on.
Are we talking about emotionally or physically?
I would say the physical can also be a symptom of something emotional.
Yeah, it was a trick question and you passed.
Okay.
It's a trick question and you passed. It's all linked. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Which
well done,
is
Steph.
Which is also what I love about the quote in dancing, because dancing to me includes, it's not just a positive celebration, it's also in the practice when you're becoming aware of all these little things that are coming up in the physical body, and then how do I honor working with where I am right now? And so much of that is the question in yoga that I don't think you get through other forms of athleticism.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah. So you're coming to your mat, and it's a space of getting really inquisitive and curious.
Yes. And it's an indication, like you're saying. So we can come to the mat and just have a good sweat. Mm-hmm. We can also come to the mat and kind of have a connection with ourselves, right? Reconnecting to our spirit. And then I think another benefit of it is to come, and what I like to do is I use my yoga practice now much more than anything as like what I like to call a tune-up. So I'm tuning up parts of my body and therefore tuning up parts of my body, my mind and my spirit by kind of checking in with how I'm physically doing, because like Steph said so well just before, is that whatever we're feeling physically has an emotional and energetic component to it. So if I'm feeling a lot of tension in my neck, then it usually means I'm doing too much. Like there's, I now have indications, like indicators that if I'm starting to feel pain in a specific area, there's something going on in the rest of my life that's telling me, hey, I need to pay attention to that. So like for me, when I'm overdoing it, I usually quote unquote throw my neck out, right? Like I look too quickly and then all of a sudden I've got a tweaked neck. And that's generally when I'm moving too quickly, I need to move slower. That's an indication, and that I'm doing too much. So I need to take things off my plate.
It's also interesting how the poses can reflect different parts of our lives or ourselves that we're ignoring. Mm-hmm. And something that came up in somebody from the community in the Facebook group asked everyone, what are some poses that Clara does a lot that you don't like? Like, what are things that are coming up? Great question.
Yeah.
And as I was answering, like I usually avoid any active twists. So like revolved triangle, revolved lunge, revolved chair pose, which you do a lot in some of your classes.
I do.
It's such a stimulator, and I get super angry and irritated. So it's interesting to see what poses you don't like and why. Like I sometimes just like having that yummy, super flowy hips and heart, but coming into the practice and saying like, okay, what shapes don't I like? Why don't I like them?
Yes.
Is this something that's happening today, or is this a pattern that's coming up? Because your body is going to show you, just like you said, the deeper kind of recess of what's going on for you emotionally.
Yeah.
And then also perhaps seeking people or teachers that challenge you in ways where you tend to avoid.
Yes.
That's a big thing for me, is finding people who poke my blind spots because I can't see them, and I want to be balanced and honor all of the things and not just do like a super yummy heart practice because I'm going to blow out my back.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And twists are really good, but it makes sense that it would bring up intense emotions, let's say, because we're literally activating the fire center.
Yeah.
And holding it for an extended period of time, especially.
Wringing stuff out, and my scalp gets itchy. So I'd sit with that. Like, what shapes do you not like doing?
Yeah. One-legged crow pose. It's probably one of my least favorite
I
poses.
can't even do that.
It's like one of my least favorite poses ever. And I still try to do it. There was actually a point in time where I think I tried to do it every day for a month because I couldn't wrap my head around it. I still can't do it. But it's a good one for me to explore because I'm very bad at it.
Yeah, that's a really difficult pose.
It's so hard.
It's so hard.
And so for some people, I've realized it actually has a lot to do with proportion. For some people, it comes so easily. And it's so funny because I'll ask them, I'll be like, okay, like, give me your tips, And they're like, oh, you just put your leg up and lift up here. And I'm like, nope, that's not. If I do that, I'm lying on the ground.
Talk about the issues with proportion then. Give an example of that.
Yeah. So, what I noticed around that specifically is that people who have more torso and less leg find this pose a lot easier because they don't have to lift up as much leg. I am all leg and very little torso. So I find that with some poses where there's a lot of ask of lifting the legs up, like Lulasana would be another great example for me, which is like when you're sitting on your butt, you cross your shins over and put your hands by your butt and you lift your feet and your butt off the ground. I was like, I'm lifting up like 3/4 of my body. I can't do it. At least that's what I tell myself.
No, but we observed that we're sitting at the same kind of level, but you have a good 3 inches on me.
Yeah,
so
but
that shows
I'm
how
all,
much
exactly.
leg you are.
Yeah, so just things like that. It's always interesting to watch. So one of the things I find, especially with more challenging poses in my own body, is like watching people who it comes easily to, and then observing what the proportions of their body are, because it just means that we have to work differently.
Yeah, and harder.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was trying not to use the word hard, but yeah, it's true. It is definitely a challenge.
Okay, so I wanted to bring up a story that I think I read in one of his books, BKS Iyengar, Light on Life or Light on Yoga. And he's speaking about one of his students starts getting really high on the esoterics of the practice and kind of getting in the ethereal realm where you lose kind of touch with your place on your mat and orientating your place in space.
We call this Vata derangement.
Okay, so there's an actual, of course, Vata is too much air. Yeah.
So derangement means you have too much air, so you're up and out.
And I've hit that in the practice where you're kind of right there, right in it, but it's fleeting for me. I don't stay in that space. So anyway, to remedy this with one of his students, he slaps the student across the face and then administers, he says, I want you to just do asana, do sun salutations, like get back in your body with the physical practice, come down, come out of the mind and the kind of swirling consciousness. So what I wanted you to share, Clara, is the story of Shiva and Parvati.
Okay, so who is Shiva and who is Parvati? So Shiva is, I always call him patron saint of yogis because he's the meditator and actually quite the rebel in the Hindu deities. He's a Hindu deity, and he's either dancing the Tandava, which is the dance of destruction and transformation, or he is seated in meditation. And so he's married to Parvati, and his favorite thing to do is meditate. And what he does is he goes to Mount Kailash, and he lives in this cave. He goes up to this cave, and he sits there for centuries at a time meditating. And when he's meditating, he's connecting to big C consciousness, meaning the consciousness that is that has no shape or form, right? And for some people, we would call that God or the divine. And what Parvati does is she gets really annoyed. So one thing that's really interesting about their relationship in terms of the story is that they're always fighting. There's a lot of passion between the two of them. Very fun couple. And she gets really annoyed because she starts to get bored because where's her husband? Her husband is like off meditating and not being with her. This is the way one of the stories goes. So what Parvati does is she finds Shiva, and nobody can wake Shiva up because he's in this state. And she has a particular scent and she's very, very sensual. And so she will dance around him or move around him so that he starts to smell her. And it starts to kind of pull him out of the ethereal and kind of pulls him back into the physical. And then it's said that they make love for another century or so. From that, she pulls him, she essentially seduces him and brings him back down. And he gets mildly annoyed, but then he also is really happy in comes back to Earth and essentially to be with her.
And doesn't she symbolize Earth?
She does.
Yeah.
Yeah, she symbolizes Earth. She also symbolizes like the ultimate partner or the ultimate wife. And because she is so devoted to Shiva. There are other stories about her that I also really like that people don't talk about as much, is that she's also actually, how she snags Shiva is that she started being a sadhanu. She started being a practitioner at the age of like 3 or 4. And she actually surpasses Shiva in terms of how enlightened she is or connected to the divine, because she does more. She's been doing more sadhana than he has, and so he is attracted to that. So she's actually his equal or a little bit above in terms of her spiritual practice
and discipline.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. She's usually just talked about in terms of the consort or the wife, but she's also in her own right a very strong practitioner, which I think is pretty cool.
And isn't discipline also part of the kind of concept around Earth, right? Is routine, like that to me kind of coincides with the symbol of Earth.
Mm-hmm. And she pulls him down, like essentially what you were kind of, why you wanted us to bring this up is because she brings Shiva back down to Earth. She is the Earth element itself, right? And she has this like very strong grounding effect on Shiva. And so because of that, like the feminine, so they say that the feminine energy lives actually not in the root chakra, but in the second chakra. And that's known as Shakti, right? And so that's where the feminine energy is said to live in all bodies, not just women. And then our Shiva consciousness lives in the third eye center. And so the idea of the earth element, bringing the air element down. And so through that connection, we create balance.
And that I wanted to bring this up just in terms of in the practice and in, I guess, kind of how yoga can be idealized as wanting to attain enlightenment. I want to be liberated, and I need to do all of these different ascetic practices and meditate and relinquish certain material concepts in order to be enlightened. But I love these two stories with Iyengar and with Shiva in that we also need to honor the physical landscape that we are in. You can't just go off in this ethereal realm on your own by yourself. It's also a practice of coming down, having a ritual, having a routine, and coming into your body, because this is where we actually live, is in our bodies.
That being said, there's also a lot of practitioners, like there are yoga styles that actually don't believe. They believe in transcending the body, that actually you want to let the body go.
Even when you're like young and living in it?
Yes.
So what does that look like?
Yeah, so the idea is that you'd be in meditation the whole time. You'd be more like in Shiva consciousness the whole time. You'd actually, like, the body is what, for some schools of thought, believe that actually hinders us from transcending, from finding enlightenment. So that's kind of interesting. So there's two schools of thought around that. One school of thought is like, stay connected to the body, stay rooted because it is the temple that our spirit lives in. Yeah. And then there's other schools of thought that say transcend the body, move past the body, out of the body, and just be with spirit. So it just depends on what we're looking for, and what does enlightenment mean for you, or what does liberation mean.
I'm just thinking more around activism and environmentalism. If we're all meditating and not tending to humanity and nature and all the things that create society, like how would that even work?
Well, to play devil's advocate, if we were all doing that, then there wouldn't be a problem with Earth because everybody would be meditating.
Yeah. You're not going to convince everyone, though.
No. We don't live in a world where everybody meditates. So, yes, so I agree with you. We have to take care of not only ourselves, but our environment. Others. So I agree.
And that completely. Is part of, because Parvati and Shiva give birth to Ganesha.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, technically, no, because the story goes is that Shiva is off at Mount Kailash and Parvati is actually bored, so she makes Ganesha. So she makes this little boy because she wants somebody to hang out with. So she creates Ganesha, and one day, one day she wants to bathe in the forest, and so she tells Ganesha to stand at the forest and not let anybody in, so she can bathe in the river nude and not worry about anybody coming to find her. And then Shiva comes home and he wants to go see Parvati, and this little 6-year-old boy comes in front of him and says, "No, you can't go into the forest." And Shiva cuts his head off. He's like, you are not the boss of me. Yeah. This is my wife. I'm going to go see her. And then he goes to see her, and she said, "Well, did you meet Ganesha?" And she's like, "What do you mean, Ganesha? The little boy." And he's like, "I cut his head off." And so she gets really upset with him. And so one of the way the story goes is that he says, "No problem, I can fix this. Like, the next animal that walks through the forest, we'll cut off its head and put it on Ganesha." And so it's an elephant that comes through the forest, unfortunately. And so Ganesha gets the elephant head. So that's one of the stories behind them. But yes, it is technically their son.
Hence going back to what you said about they're always fighting.
Yeah, there's a lot of
typical marital conflict.
Yeah, they're a very exciting couple. A very exciting couple.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's another story, though, I don't know if you know, that Parvati actually commits suicide.
No.
So that's also an interesting story. So Shiva's not super liked by Parvati's family because he's a rebel. He's got dreads. He hangs out with the dead. You know, he's kind of like, he's not a conformist. And Parvati comes from a well-to-do family. And so their union is actually not recognized by her family. And her family's having a celebration and doesn't invite Shiva. They invite their daughter Parvati, but they don't invite Shiva. And so as a sign of retaliation towards her parents, she jumps off of Mount Kailash.
So is she immortal?
No, she dies, and Shiva never is with nobody ever again. Then he becomes a celibate.
So she's not a goddess.
She is a goddess, but yes, some goddesses die.
Okay, I'm like, Am I confused with
this? No. But like with stories like this, one of the things that I like about like Hindu myth in this way is that they have a lot of human tendencies.
Yeah, and contradictions.
Yes, they
which
do.
Is interesting.
Which is what humans are.
Yeah.
And that's why I find them so interesting, is that we're supposed to relate to them. That's the power of myth.
Well, she's one of my favorite deities, and kind of, she's not really talked about. She's not really worshipped as much as the other goddesses, just for the earthbound tendencies that she has.
So you like that about her?
I respect it.
Tell me more.
Just because I think the practice needs to be put in action where we can see it. Okay. And she embodies that. And she, I didn't know the story about the discipline with her equal to Shiva. So there's some feminism in there, which also down for. Yeah.
I know, that's why I brought it up. I was like, people don't know the story about her.
I love it.
Very interesting.
She's not just this seductive. Yeah. But she embraces all of the senses, which we lose in meditation. If you're absolving the body, you lose your tactile and sensory connection to the world, and that's how she brings Shiva back. It's just really luscious, and the dance is what I think of.
Yeah. And in the same breath, depending upon the style of meditation, you want to feel all your senses. You just don't want to be distracted by them.
So is that Tantra?
It could be, yes, it can be tantric, but just in terms of styles of meditation. But yes, in Tantra, you definitely want to be feeling, in terms of the philosophy, you are experiencing all your senses.
And you're celebrating the body. The body is something to be rejoiced.
Because you are divine already, including your body.
I love Tantra. We'll talk about that fully in another episode.
Yes, that we will.
So my last piece for this discussion is around ritual, because ritual, having something that becomes your anchor, has a more grounding element to settle whatever it is you're going through. Again, we talked about anxiety, too much action, and it also, again, is a marker of where you are in place and time. So for example, for myself, if I'm traveling or if I'm staying at a friend's house or what have you, whatever's going on in life, this might be the thing I do that anchors me, no matter what kind of external disruptions are going on.
And so what would be a ritual that you would do in order to
center myself, to orient? Writing is one. When I wake up, I usually do breathing practices and then have a cup of coffee or tea, depending on what is available. Hopefully it's coffee. And then I write, and that kind of orients me. And grounds me, especially if you're traveling and you don't know the space or what food's available. You've been up all night with different noises.
Yes.
That's like my landing point.
Yes. Beautiful.
How about you?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing there's a couple of things that I do. The biggest thing I would do would either be meditation or put legs up the wall, and pranayama practices for sure.
Why would you do legs up the wall? I love that pose, but give our audience some of the benefits.
Yeah, so why I do legs up the wall would be after a long flight or after a long day of travel, because you're moving through space at such a fast rate, generally, unless you're walking. So if you're in a plane, train, or automobile or what have you. So it's actually really hard on the body to catch up to where you are. So putting legs up the wall is has a very grounding effect, gets you into the parasympathetic, and just kind of, for me, allows me to arrive into the here and now, because generally I'm actually also fairly jet lagged. So I find that is just that's the thing that I do usually when I show up to a hotel room or whatever, is like bump the wall, legs up the wall, and then chill for a bit. And then usually if I'm fortunate enough to have a bath, then a bath. Immerse myself in water and kind of bring myself back in.
And what are some of the rituals that you've expressed in past trainings, workshops, as takeaways for students? What are some things that you, have offered?
To connect to root chakra?
For root chakra, or just ritual, setting up some sort of offering for yourself. So something like lighting a candle, or in how you prepare your altar.
Preparing an altar would be one of the greatest things I find in terms of getting myself into the here and now, is like, so I have a little travel altar, usually with a little candle, so put that all together and then light it. Another great way is to take 10 deep breaths, to close your eyes and just take 10 deep breaths, or to soften the gaze and widen the periphery to feel everything around you.
And I didn't ask you this, but you mentioned breathing techniques. What are some pranayama that you could do to ground for root chakra?
Nadi Shodhana would be, alternate nostril breathing would be a great one. It also balances the both sides of the hemispheres of the brain, as well as the lunar and solar side of the body. And then another great one that I would probably do would be Brahmari's breath, bee's breath. And that's not necessarily, I know, put hands on lower abdomen or hands on thighs and then hum down into that area would be another one that I would do or recommend to people. And then I think the last one would be a moving meditation with your feet almost as wide, or shoulder width wide, and then just inhaling up, exhaling down, just kind of like this Tai Chi movement to kind of bring yourself and really focus on the exhale, hands coming down.
And the softening.
Yeah,
exactly. And what I'll share with our audience is that this week, so we're moving into Muladhara, root chakra, earth theme. So every day this week, Clara, in her chakra series, we have a class for every day of the week that honors the root chakra that you can go and take. A lot of grounding, a lot of hips, a lot of legs, a lot of the things that we've spent the last 40 or so minutes talking about.
Yeah. So thank you, Steph, so much for curating all the questions. So good at it. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by the Practice with Clara app. That's mine. I've created almost 100 yoga classes for you to do at home or on the go. And they're available to you on your favorite device, including mobile, desktop, and TV. These classes include vinyasa, slow flow, hatha, restorative, yin, mantra, meditation. I also just had a baby, so I created prenatal yoga for all 4 trimesters. So head over to clararobertsoss.com/join to learn more. Or search for the Practice with Clara app at your favorite app store. There's a 7-day free trial, so no commitment. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast. We've got lots of good stuff in store for you. Until next time, namaste.